The heavy silence inside the private quarters of the British monarchy was broken not by a grand proclamation, but by the quiet rustle of a cream-colored envelope. Inside this unassuming packaging lay a document that would trigger one of the most definitive crises in modern royal history. Meghan Markle had sent what many within the palace walls described as her final plea. This was not a letter filled with emotional vulnerability or requests for familial sympathy. Instead, it was a structured, calculated proposal aimed directly at the sovereign. The contents of the pages detailed a meticulously drafted plan for a partial return to royal life, requesting access to significant family gatherings and a carefully managed restoration of limited official duties. Official duties within the context of the British monarchy represent public tasks carried out directly on behalf of the crown, the enduring institution embodied by the reigning king. Meghan sought validation, visibility, and a guaranteed platform under the royal umbrella, believing that time and changing circumstances might have softened the firm boundaries established years prior during the Sussexes' highly publicized departure. However, King Charles did not call for his senior advisors, nor did he request days to ponder the implications of the message. After reading through the document twice with absolute focus, he placed it onto his wooden desk and uttered a single word that carried the weight of finality. No, this rejection was not merely a refusal to request. It marked the beginning of an absolute alignment within the core structure of the royal family. Behind this immediate decision stood the unyielding perspectives of Prince William and Princess Anne. The Prince of Wales, as the heir apparent next in line to the throne, viewed the letter not as an olive branch, but as a strategic maneuver designed to bypass established protocols through private emotional pressure. William had watched the emotional toll these ongoing disputes had taken on his wife, Catherine, and their young children, and he was determined to shield his household from another exhausting cycle of public drama and shifting narratives. Princess Anne, known widely as the Princess Royal and a stalwart working member of the family, reached a conclusion that mirrored the future king's stance. She argued that the integrity of the institution relied entirely on consistency and unwavering commitment. To grant a special exception for a partial return would mean opening a dangerous pathway where royal duty becomes negotiable based on personal convenience. If a private invitation could be twisted into public proof of acceptance, then even a single meeting would be weaponized as the first stepping stone toward full restoration. As these discussions solidified into an unbendable palace policy, Meghan waited in California for a response, expecting either a series of conditional counteroffers or a strategic delay from the palace machinery. Instead, the communication she received contained absolute finality. King Charles would not enter into negotiations. He would not schedule a private audience, and he would not reconsider the boundaries of the separation. The language used in the response went far beyond the immediate request, sending a clear message that no future appeals for a restored royal role would ever be entertained. This uncompromising stance was a direct result of a unified front demanded by William and Anne, who insisted that no hidden loopholes or back-channel promises should remain to revive the conflict. The king picked up his traditional fountain pen, signed the final page of the directive, and capped it with a small, sharp click that echoed through the quiet room. That tiny sound signified that the matter had transformed from a sensitive family hesitation into the official, settled position of the crown itself. To truly comprehend why King Charles rejected this final plea so completely, one must look past the ink on the paper and examine the profound personal motivations and deep-seated anxieties driving each key figure toward an irreversible historical collision. This was not a simple bureaucratic disagreement. It was a clash of fundamental fears. The king was caught in an agonizing emotional trap, terrified of permanently losing his younger son, Harry, yet fully aware that accepting Meghan's terms could shatter the structural boundaries holding the modern monarchy together. He was not choosing between malice and kindness, but rather determining which profound loss the institution could realistically survive. Meghan, on her part, understood the immense stakes of this final gambit. Her objective was never merely about securing an invitation to a private family dinner or a quiet holiday gathering. She desired formal, institutional recognition that her royal identity and global influence had not been permanently erased from the history of the House of Windsor. The silence that met her strategic overture was far more damaging than a loud argument, as it signaled a complete withdrawal of the palace's willingness to negotiate. Prince William stood by the window of the king's private office, his posture rigid as he carefully mastered his internal anger before speaking to his father. For William, this was an act of defense for the peace of his immediate family, believing that any concession would inevitably invite further exposure and institutional instability. Princess brought a calm but devastatingly powerful logic to the table, maintaining that royal service is a lifelong dedication that cannot be cast aside during times of criticism, and then casually reclaimed when the external landscape shifts. Hidden beneath the sophisticated phrasing of Meghan's letter was the silent compliance of Prince Harry, who had endorsed essential demands in the ultimate hope that his father's paternal instincts would override the strict counseling of his brother and aunt. For a brief moment, the king had wrestled with the idea of offering a minor concession, perhaps allowing a single appearance at a non-official family gathering without any accompanying royal status. But when Charles turned to his eldest son and asked whether any path toward reconciliation remained possible, Prince William provided an answer that altered the course of the discussion entirely. The future king stated that while personal forgiveness might exist in private, a formal royal restoration could never take place. This pivotal moment brought to light a hidden trigger from months earlier, an incident behind closed doors that had permanently altered the family's willingness to compromise. Long before this final letter arrived, an act of mercy had been extended to the Sussexes in the form of a private invitation to a small family memorial reception at Windsor Castle. A memorial reception is a private, solemn gathering designed to honor a deceased individual away from the glare of public ceremony and media attention. The king had authorized their attendance under the strict condition that the evening would remain entirely confidential, hoping the sacred nature of the event would soften years of bitter estrangement. Yet, before the gathering had even concluded, Meghan approached King Charles near the library entrance, turning a moment of family grief into a high-stakes negotiation by demanding that the palace officially confirm her return to selected public events before she left the country. She warned that continued silence from the royal household would be framed as deliberate exclusion. Prince William intervened as the confrontation escalated, declaring that a private family memorial could not be used as leverage for public concessions. When palace staff later discovered that a draft statement announcing ongoing talks of a Sussex return had already been prepared by external representatives, the trust was shattered beyond repair. Princess calmly stepped forward, opened the library door, and brought the conversation to a swift end. The memory of that broken trust loomed large over a cream envelope on the king's desk, ensuring that this time the door would be locked completely. The confrontation that had permanently fractured the foundation of royal trust did not remain confined to memories or unspoken resentment. As the fallout from the final letter deepened, the tension shifted away from conceptual arguments and directly into the highly fortified spaces of the king's private office. Charles had summoned Prince William and Princess, and before issuing any official response to California, knowing that the structural future of the monarchy would depend entirely on a united front. Inside this meeting room, the atmosphere was thick with a heavy finality, made sharper by the complete exclusion of the palace's usual operational machinery. No personal secretaries, communication directors, or constitutional legal advisors were permitted to enter. Charles had demanded absolute, unvarnished honesty, but the reality he faced was far more unyielding than he anticipated. The king, speaking strictly through the vulnerable perspective of a father who feared losing the last remaining threads of connection with his younger son, proposed a controlled compromise. He suggested a narrow, highly monitored framework where Meghan and Harry could be granted a limited number of private family invitations, completely stripped of any official duties or public representation. Charles believed that a minor, tightly managed opening could diffuse the compounding bitterness without restoring their former royal status. However, Prince William rejected the proposal without a moment of hesitation. The future king argued that the boundary between private concessions and public pressure had long been obliterated by the Sussexes' previous actions. Every past instance of private family mercy, William pointed out, had eventually been adapted into strategic leverage to force further concessions from the institution. He refused to allow his wife, Catherine, and their children to be exposed to another exhausting cycle of public speculation, forced explanations, and emotional instability. Princess took the argument even further, delivering a calm but devastating critique of the king's paternal leniency. The princess royal warned her brother that compassion without definitive boundaries was no longer virtue, It was simply a permission slip for the same conflict to restart whenever Meghan felt a strategic need to demand another entrance. Charles, visibly shaken, rose from his desk and directly challenged the heir to the throne, asking whether William was truly prepared to permanently close the door on his own brother. William remained standing, looking directly at the sovereign, and answered that Harry had already made a definitive choice to close those doors himself through years of public criticism and calculated distance. Now, the future king insisted, the monarchy had a duty to decide which of those doors could never be reopened under any circumstances. To solidify their position and place a vital piece of evidence onto the wooden desk. It was a physical draft statement discovered months earlier during the Windsor Memorial reception, prepared by external representatives before the evening had even concluded, which announced that formal discussions regarding a Sussex return were already underway, and argued that this document provided absolute, undeniable proof that Meghan did not enter private family spaces to seek personal reconciliation, but rather to manufacture a public, institutional result. William then revealed a deeper, more troubling detail that had bypassed the king's office entirely. Meghan's final plea had not just been sent to Charles. It contained a separate, direct request addressed to William's independent household, seeking to establish a direct communication channel that bypassed the monarch's senior advisors. The prince viewed this as a clear attempt to build a secondary route into royal decision-making, designed to create division between the current sovereign and the future king. This revelation transformed the discussion completely, forcing Charles to recognize that the choice between his family and the crown had already been forced upon him by those who transformed private contact into systemic institutional pressure. A heavy silence filled the room before the king took his fountain pen, crossed out the compromise paragraph and prepared directive, and ordered the language to be altered permanently. No royal return would be discussed now, or at any point in the future. The physical signing of the document concluded the meeting, but the real challenge shifted to the execution of the policy. Royal rejection is not enforced by a single dramatic declaration. It is maintained to the quiet, systematic closing of structural access. It manifests in invitations that are never generated, phone calls that are permanently redirected by automated staff, guest lists that remain entirely unchanged, and back-channel promises that are no longer permitted to exist. William and it immediately moved past the emotional weight of the confrontation, turning their focus toward translating the king's signature into an unbreakable operational structure. William, utilizing his immense influence as the direct heir next in line to the throne, locked down access to his independent household, ensuring that no strategic proposals could ever find a foothold within his staff, and who held decades of deep institutional trust among senior courtiers, major charities, and ceremonial organizers, integrated the new rule across the wider machinery of the state. Courtiers are the senior staff members responsible for managing the daily operations, sensitive communication, and logistical arrangements of the royal households. With Anne's enforcement, the decision ceased to be a private family dispute and became the settled, unalterable law of the institution. Charles watched this vast machinery snap into place with profound sense of sorrow. His private secretary, the monarch's senior advisor responsible for handling highly sensitive state matters, systematically listed the areas now completely insulated from the Sussexes: official representation, ceremonial appearances, household communications, and family attendance. The king fought for one final protection, insisting that the new policy must not block emergency personal contact or private communication between himself and Harry. William agreed to the single exception, but only under the absolute condition that those private father and son conversations could never be used as a vehicle to negotiate Meghan's status or titles. A clear, impenetrable line was drawn between the private family bond and the public authority of the crown, and reinforced this boundary when a senior courtier suggested that Meghan might be permitted to attend an unofficial, private holiday gathering at Sandringham. The princess royal crossed the name off the potential guest list herself, stating that a private invitation would immediately be presented to the global media as a public step toward acceptance. The rules were tightened to their absolute limit. Any future communication regarding the Sussexes would flow through one singular, highly monitored office, preventing them from contacting separate households in the hope of finding a softer answer. When Meghan finally received the full details of this sealed system in California, her initial disbelief quickly transformed into absolute fury. She had calculated that Charles would hesitate out of paternal guilt. She had expected William to object out of long-standing anger, and she had even anticipated that and would demand strict conditions. What she had never anticipated was this absolute, deafening silence. There was no invitation to clarify her intentions, no private message of regret from the king, and not a single palace official willing to reopen negotiations. Every side entrance she believed remained open had vanished, and the reality of her complete institutional erasure began to take hold. The absolute finality of the palace's structural restrictions did not just spark internal anger within the Sussex household. It completely dismantled the strategic architecture Meghan had spent months constructing. The illusion that a secondary channel of negotiation could be forced open by public pressure vanished as the unified front of King Charles, Prince William, and Princess, and held strong against every external probe. Confronted with a system that redirected every communication into a single, highly monitored office, Prince Harry realized that the division between his birth family and the institutional authority of the crown had become an unbridgeable canyon. The specific parameters of the royal directive covered every conceivable avenue of visibility: official duties, public ceremonial appearances, direct communication with individual royal households, and any media narrative suggesting that a reconciliation or return to the firm was approaching. Ceremonial appearances within the operational context of the British monarchy are formal royal occasions where physical attendance serves as a powerful public signal of institutional status, acceptance, and legitimacy. By stripping away even the possibility of a non-working presence at these high-profile events, the palace ensured that Meghan could no longer use the imagery of the royal family to bolster her independent global brand. In a final attempt to salvage a personal connection that could later be leveraged into institutional access, Harry bypassed the official channels and attempted to contact his father directly through a highly restricted personal telephone number. However, the call did not reach the sovereign. It was intercepted by a senior palace aide who calmly but unyieldingly informed the Duke that the king's official position had been finalized and would not be subjected to further review. When Harry requested to be transferred directly to his father's private line, the aide firmly refused, demonstrating that the structural boundaries established by William and had completely insulated the monarch from emotional manipulation. The strategic fallout of this decision widened with brutal velocity as a pre-planned, quiet meeting in London between Harry and a sympathetic, extended member of the royal family was abruptly cancelled after the palace issued a direct warning to all relatives, advising them not to act as unauthorized intermediaries or back-channel messengers. Left with no operational routes inside the United Kingdom, Meghan began drafting a sweeping public statement that framed the palace's structural boundaries as a calculated campaign of personal exclusion rather than an act of institutional protection. But Harry, looking at the absolute finality of the message on his screen, realized that launching another media assault against the sovereign would only validate William and Anne's warnings, rendering the familial separation permanent and legally irreversible. In a desperate bid to find clarity amidst the collapsing strategy, Harry requested a highly unusual private meeting with Prince William, asking specifically that the conversation take place without the presence of Meghan, King Charles, Princess, and/or any senior palace advisors. For the first time since the crisis began, the struggle moved entirely away from public relations strategy and carefully worded legal statements, leaving the two brothers alone to confront the deep wounds they had spent years refusing to address. William agreed to the meeting but insisted on a highly calculated condition. The conversation must take place at a neutral residence entirely outside the main palace apartments, and Meghan's permanent institutional exclusion would not be reopened for debate. A neutral residence represents a private, secure location detached from official royal offices, specifically selected to eliminate institutional pressure and prevent the interaction from being framed as a formal palace negotiation. When the brothers finally sat across from each other, Harry demanded to know whether King Charles had truly authorized the brutal finality of the rejection, or whether William and it had effectively coerced the sovereign into signing the directive. William did not flinch. He answered calmly that while the king had made the final sovereign decision, both the heir apparent and the princess royal had refused to hide the existential risks of compromise behind soft, diplomatic language. Harry's emotional restraint fractured as he accused his older brother of transforming temporary distance into a lifetime sentence of personal banishment, arguing that Meghan's letter had merely offered a controlled, mutually beneficial return rather than an institutional takeover. William remained entirely composed, stating that personal forgiveness was a private matter that could be nurtured over time, but formal royal restoration was an absolute impossibility because the family could no longer trust that private conversations would not be weaponized as fuel for future public media campaigns. The future king was not protecting historical pride. He was defending the psychological peace of his wife and children. Harry finally confessed that the letter had indeed been a calculated strategic opening, designed to use a private family meeting to generate public momentum toward a formal return. This crucial admission confirmed the exact warnings that William and Anne had placed before the king, proving that the Sussexes' operational pattern had never truly changed. The intense confrontation ended not with an explosion of anger, but with a weary, painful acceptance of reality. Harry gave a solemn promise that he would no longer seek alternative routes through extended relatives or separate royal households, realizing that the royal door had been locked forever, even if the private door between a father and son remained technically unlocked. As the sun rose the following morning, the palace's verdict was no longer a highly classified secret. It transformed into a monumental national judgment debated across global television networks and splashed across the front pages of every major newspaper. A single, historic photograph of Windsor Castle's massive iron gates remaining resolutely shut against a crowd of reporters captured the global mood, accompanied by a devastating three-word headline that read, "No road back." This public declaration transformed a painful family dispute into a permanent constitutional reality that everyone could instantly understand. Public opinion fractured immediately, with Meghan supporters condemning the decision as an act of cruel institutional rejection, while defenders of the monarchy praised the king for finally prioritizing the long-term stability of the crown over private familial sentiment. Broadcasters openly described Prince William as a future monarch who was already actively shaping the institution he would one day inherit, while Princess was hailed as the moral anchor of the family, whose unwavering insistence on the true meaning of duty had saved the palace from a catastrophic cycle of endless compromise. In California, Meghan watched the global coverage unfold before turning off the screen in absolute silence, realizing that her final plea had produced the exact opposite of its intended effect, cementing her exclusion in the eyes of the entire world. King Charles later summoned William and Anne back to his private office, where the entire crisis had begun. There was no joy, celebration, or sense of triumph within the room. Closing a definitive path for a family member meant mourning the permanent death of a father's hope. Yet, the king no longer exhibited a single moment of hesitation. He confirmed that the directive would remain an unalterable law of the state. Meghan would never return to official duties, represent the sovereign, receive a ceremonial platform, or use private family contact to negotiate institutional status. By closing every side door simultaneously, the king ensured that personal paternal sympathy could never again be misinterpreted as official royal restoration. Charles took Meghan's original cream envelope, folded it precisely, and placed it inside a locked historical drawer, removing it from his desk forever. The door had closed completely, and in that profound historic silence, the British monarchy resolutely chose institutional stability over personal uncertainty, enduring duty over strategic pressure, and a brutal, final truth over a temporary, fragile peace.